Sai, it's a pleasure to welcome you.
Thank you.
You know, it is no secret that India is claiming its rightful position in the world.
Right.
5,000-year-old civilization, okay, done amazing thing throughout the centuries.
Right.
I think every few centuries, we find our own sweet spot. And our biggest strength has been our human resource and the education system we have done for the last 50 plus years. 65% of the population, I'm told, is under 35. Amazing stats. And look at the potential.
It's going to be the youngest population for decades now.
So the first question I have is, how do we make sure that the population that is coming, who is below 35 years of age, because we have access to the entire globe now,
Right.
all the resources are available to us.
Right.
How do we then ensure, to begin with, that they get the right kind of education
Right.
to put them at par or even better than the world is doing?
Right.
Then we have to figure out how many of them can be trained to become good professionals.
Right.
And out of that, how many can be focused on innovation and entrepreneurs? It's a huge thing. I'm putting a complex question, but it's right in your alley.
Okay.
So you can answer that.
So I think let's look at the strengths of India as a country. First thing is, never in our history before have we had a unified single political unit with the world's third largest or fourth largest standing army, a political establishment that wields power over all parts of Bharat, a population which represents perhaps the biggest possible market for the rest of the world, a population under 35 which is significant and which is bound to drive India's growth story for the next 2 decades at the very least, a fantastic education system which we didn't realize until the West told us that we are actually doing a good job of it, a fantastic brand that we have created through institutions such as IITs and other institutions which now rule the roost when it comes to Silicon Valley. And then something happened, according to me, in 2020. Most people fail to understand this. You see, while the lockdown happened, people assumed that India's growth story would stop in its tracks during the lockdown. But it did two things. It gave the world vaccines, shared its technology with the rest of the world, managed to vaccinate the rest of its entire population. 3, it also showed that this country could function and work from home, right? Not that even the rest of the world could, but people didn't think that India had what it takes to work from home in terms of technology. So that has effectively told us two things. That not only can we work from home, the Indian population, regardless of the space you're looking at, the urban or rural space, is particularly comfortable with technology. So much so that teaching was done through technology, distance education, in public education institutions in villages and districts. Okay? So that tells me that Indians are best placed to understand the value of technology and its convergence with education. So I think we are going to look at some fantastic revolutions, both in terms of scale and depth, in this sector in Bharat over the next 5 years. Because if India really has to retain its position or do even better on the economic front, not only does it need to improve its, let's say, upskilling ways, but it also needs to make sure that the percolation of technology and education happens in the deepest of areas possible. And that I think is going to be the focus. 2, all these days we were told that the Indian education system focuses exclusively on rote learning and doesn't have critical thinking. But its inherent strengths have proven themselves on the global stage. 3, the young population coupled with the flow of capital from the rest of the world and home-generated capital also means that India is going to be the epicenter for the next wave of startups. From Silicon Valley, it moved to Israel, then it moved to China. I think it's now going to move to India. That is the way of the future. People used to associate only Hyderabad and Bangalore with the IT hubs of India, so to speak. But now you're going to see a lot of hitherto unknown cities contribute to this, such as Indore, Chandigarh, a lot of places, simply because the percolation of talent and knowledge has happened across the world. Across the board in Bharat. So exciting times are ahead. As much as there are multiple issues in terms of challenges that we have to look forward to and deal with, I'm confident that it's going to be one among the most interesting phases, not just for India, but for the rest of the world, simply because India represents so much of the world.
No, absolutely. Very comprehensive answer, and thank you for that. So you talked about tier 2, tier 3 cities. That's where, most of our emerging population also comes from.
Correct.
One thing that comes cropping up every now and then, and more often so now, regardless of which government is in place. For the last 10 years, we have had a fantastic, economic development happening. India will keep growing regardless. We just have to channel it the right way. So the question then that is coming up is, it has to be very inclusive. Inclusive first because of the economic strata. There are all levels of people. So when we talk about IT and evolution of innovation, all that, we focus only on the big top tier cities. And that has to percolate down to the lowest denominator. Then we have multicultural society for generations. And we have survived and thrived through that. So inclusive on both sides of it. And how do we ensure that? Because otherwise, if you do not take everybody wrong, whichever way you want to dice and cut it, there'll be dead weight hanging on to it. And we don't want that. So how do we ensure that, it is happening?
So, perhaps the one respectful disagreement that I have is that India's growth story on the economic front cannot be taken for granted. And I'll give you a simple example. You know why? Because people thought prior to 2004 that the growth story would continue regardless of who comes to power. But 2004 to 2014 is seen as a lost decade of lost economic opportunities and multiple opportunities. So who remains in power is crucial because it is a certain vision that that particular establishment represents. So in the interest of, let's say, driving the world's economy, it is important for Bharat to have political continuity of this current dispensation for multiple reasons, notwithstanding, let's say, some of its setbacks or flaws, so to speak. Second, what is happening on the tech front is not limited exclusively to the, let's say, the elite areas such as IT. First of all, IT is no more elite simply because it is focused on connectivity and technology percolation. And the biggest example is digital revolution and digital percolation in Bharat. TV has been replaced by the mobile phone. And the mobile phone is responsible for communication, for dissemination, for content creation, and for reaching out of public schemes. So that's important. 3, there's a huge revolution happening even on the agriculture front, where people are trying to combine agriculture with modern techniques. They're learning from Israel and other parts of the world. So I learned recently that Israel has established over 27 centers of agriculture support in Bharat, where it is bringing its own unique experience with arid area irrigation to those parts of Bharat which are, let's say, water scarce. Okay, so I don't think we are looking at technology or economics primarily from an urban perspective anymore. And the best part of the last 10 years has been the government's push on this front. See, at the end of the day, you and I can do a lot of things when we're in the private sector. What is it that the state brings to the table? The state brings to the table a multiplier effect, that it can replicate the very same subject or the very same effect across the country using its enormous resources which are at its disposal. That is what he has managed to do. So Mr. Modi, what he has managed to do, according to me, is to fix the basics, address the fundamentals. And the best part is that several schemes of his are targeting the women. Because he knows that if women take charge, then the rest of the family falls in line. And that is even more true of rural spaces. So I'm very confident of it.
On that note of bridging the gap and bringing equality, been a pleasure. Thank you so much for coming and being on the panel. Appreciate that so much.
Thank you.